Hi, I'm Mike Smith. And along with Alasdair and me, we make ambient music as Tayus. Our debut album Synergism was released on Wera Foxman Records in November 2020. And in this podcast, I'm going to discuss the process behind making that music, a bit about the album, and prospects of what playing live as Tayus might be like. Ali also plays keyboards for the band Number Stations and makes music with Fraser Brown as Dohnavùr. The process with Dohnavùr and Tayus is quite similar in that Ali makes musical stems or sketches on his modular synthesizer rig, records and creates audio files for us, which he then sends to Fraser and I. I start off the podcast by asking Ali how he goes about making these modular stems.
I will start with a clean slate. I will unplug every jack that's in the module except for the output to the mixer. And I'll decide normally that I will choose a module I've not used for a while, or perhaps it's a new module, or just something along those lines. And I will simply add several modules together in a link until I get the sound, not even necessarily that I'm looking for, but a sound that has just turned out to be very interesting. And once I've got something the way I like the sound of it, I'll press record on my Zoom R8 recorder, and I will record that for a number of minutes. I'm not going to sit down here in a great mood or a bad mood and try to write a track that will reflect that. I'm just making sound design that interests me and I think sounds nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different way of doing it. I'm not writing a track because I'm happy or I'm sad or I'm thoughtful about what's happening. It's music, pure and simple. This is what it sounds like. This is what I'm making. I like how that sounds. And I like the fact that both then you and Fraser, for both different bands, will just take some of those and think, oh, that speaks to me. Mm-hmm. And then either you or Fraser might make a track that sounds quite upbeat or quite downbeat or quite melancholy. And that's when the emotion comes into it. Premise was always not to use that as this is a track by Ali Omay, a modular track, but it was always designed to be used for others. Not a sample pack, but just the basis of something to be used. Right. No matter if it's a wee snippet taken and chopped up here and there, yeah, or whether, like you yourself, use the whole track in its entirety. Mm. That's how it's worked out with yourself and Fraser, and delighted I am with the results.
The other thing you mentioned there that I found really interesting when you first talked about it was that you unplug everything. And is that unusual?
It's interesting. I'm looking at modular Facebook groups and stuff like that all the time, and YouTube, etc. And people will fairly regularly comment that they'll leave a patch running for, insert the word here, days, weeks, months, because they have decided they love, maybe it's self-generating, for example. They like the way it's moving. I've come from a sort of preset background in the sense that in all the bands I've been in, and I'm still in obviously the band Number Stations, the synthesizers that I've got have presets, either ones I've made or the ones that are in the machine already, and I'll use that to create textures and tunes, and either I add my layers to the band's tunes or I'll create something that the band want to add to. And I've always thought that was just what you did. I only got into modular in 2016 from small starts, and I didn't think I'd like it. I just absolutely love it. And the thing about it is that I like the fact that, well, actually, I thought at the start I would be scared that I could never recreate a sound, hence the fact I'm recording it. But that wasn't always the way. I didn't have a computer, as you well know, at the start, because my laptop had died. And I was playing these things in a module that weren't being recorded, and they were lost forever.
Right.
And I thought, this is not right. So I got myself to Zoom R8. So now everything's recorded from the modular, because whether it be a few seconds or a few minutes or whatever, I want to have it for posterity, either for me to use or for somebody else to use. And unpatching is just my way of saying, I don't want this patch to sound like the last patch.
Right.
Because there's a whole different range of modules I'm using, therefore it cannot sound the same.
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the strengths of, the Synergism album, and also the stems that you sent. There are very few that are, there's some similarities because you've done them, but each one is different. Different in feel, different in texture, and it's a challenge, but it's also quite refreshing because it's not like, every time you hear it, oh, there's another Ali Omei patch.
Right. I think that the thing about it is that I've got a medium-sized rig. It's neither massive and it's not tiny, and therefore there are quite a few sound sources in there, quite a few effects modules in there, and lots of utility modules. So if I'm unpatching, the chances are that I won't be using the same oscillator as I used the last time, or the same sample module as I used last time, and I won't be using the same effects modules. So therefore, they will inevitably sound different to the one that I did the previous night or the previous day.
Right. Yep.
And I suppose that's the joy, because that's the way that you and Fraser have both enjoyed listening to the stems, and you like one, you don't like the next, you don't like the next, you like that one. It's great because I'm not expecting you to like everyone, but the ones that jump out at you and say, I want to use that, I love the fact that that's just you or Fraser jumping on one of them and thinking, I can do something with that. That gives me absolute pleasure.
Yeah. When I was producing with the tracks you send, it's funny listening through to all of them. So even the ones that we didn't use in the album, listening through to all of them, there are some that kind of leap off the page and it's like, I really know what to do with this. Do you know what I mean? But there are some others that kind of take you by surprise almost, and I kind of imported some into Ableton, and I was adding effects and adding little extra layers to it. And there's that old expression about sculptors basically releasing the sculpture from whatever they're working with, whether it's marble or whether it's wood or something like that. And to some extent, that's what I thought. I bring it into Ableton and I have a good listen, and then I'm kind of like, well, okay, I think it goes in this direction. And often, it might not go exactly the way that I had planned, but I wind up with something at the end that I think, nope, that was the way it was supposed to be. Because I kind of chisel away and do what I'm going to do and add my effects. And at the end of it, it's nice to sit back and kind of go, yeah, that's what needed to be done to that. I think the other thing that I stumbled with when I first started making music with them is that I was trying to replicate what Fraser had done. I was trying to be a Fraser, and make it the big production, the big number that he does. And there was a kind of moment of realization where I thought, no, actually, Mike, you've got to do a mic on it. Do the ambient textural stuff.
Absolutely. And
actually, that took a burden off because I could do the textural stuff and still make some nice noises with it. We've had a look at track 25 through this video that I've produced, and it's startling how few tracks there are on it. But it's my point again all the way through the album was not to kind of try and overwhelm those original stems, but to just kind of augment them and make the music in them kind of more full and kind of evolve it into a full track rather than kind of just throw the kitchen sink at it and have 42 tracks. Also interesting listening to the album as a whole. There's a coherence there, and I think part of the coherence is that it's your stems, and it's also my production. And so you've got, you know, the tracks there are each quite different, but there's enough similarity that it's a kind of full body of work as Tayus the band.
Agreed.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that makes them nicer to listen to, you know, because each one comes along and you go, oh, I wonder where this is going to take me. But it's not, you know, fundamentally different from one track to the next. You know, there's a musical journey. It does take you somewhere. You know, people have remarked on the fact that each one is just like a little journey, a little story, and then it finishes. And then there's the next one, or the next chapter, you know.
For example, the first track in the album is it's not atonal, but it's not as melodic as some others are.
Sure.
So it starts off with that, and people might think, oh, that's interesting, but then it just starts to grow. And I like that about the album. It's unexpected, and it takes you on a slight journey.
I kind of put some feelers out to one of the communities I'm in to say, how should you order the tracks on an album? You know, and one of the answers came back, well, always put your strongest track first. You know, and that I kind of thought about that and thought, well, I can understand that, because if you're in the iTunes age or in the Bandcamp age,
yes,
you want,
absolutely,
you know, that first track to be the one that makes the impact and makes people buy the album. But on the other hand, actually my favourite one is 41, the closer. You know, because it's a big kind of underworld res style melodic, you know, tune. And to me, that's the one that I think is fitting as a closer, because just as you've said, you've been on that journey, you get to that track, and it's a kind of closure for the journey, and it's nice and melodic, and it's tuneful, and it goes somewhere, and that kind of brings us into land, and there's a lot to be said for that, I think.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if anyone said to us that they listened to the first track and thought this is not for me and moved on. Who knows? If they did, fair play to you. That's their choice.
So the first track actually is an interesting one. I think that's maybe one of the first ones I did, and I took your stem and basically I added nothing, but threw it through a metric ton of effects, you know, to distort it and to do all kinds of weird stuff to it. So I mangled it good and proper. But it was kind of like, oh, okay, I don't know what I've done to this, but it's gone somewhere. But there's no getting away from the fact that it's quite an opener, you know, because it kind of takes you by the scruff of the neck and says, listen to this. And then, you know, other tracks in the album are quieter or kind of spooky or kind of soundtrack type material. But that was just a kind of, you know, punch in the face style stuff.
And I like the fact, of course, that you've got, I think, one track agnostic is just in there with all the numbers.
Yep.
Obviously, that's not how way it works with, say, Dohnavùr. Fraser names all the tracks, and the tracks have got meaning, etc. And I like the simplicity of you calling the tracks after the number of the track / them that I gave you. But yes, it and also in a way, it's kind of honest in the sense that if we named all the tracks, you'd be having to think of arbitrary names for them.
Exactly.
As if you were thinking, this is the track that I want to make people think that you're walking down the bridge in Prague with the ice on the sea. And that's not how it is. No,
it's not, absolutely.
You can make of the track what you will, but it's track 42, and that's all there is to it, really.
Right. I mean, it's
I like that.
You're dead right, because when you name it, you imbue meaning to it, right? And so that each of those numbers was the number of the stem on the stick. And so from my kind of housekeeping perspective, it was very easy to then go, okay, these are the tracks I've used, you know, and I don't have to do a lookup table between the number and what I called it. So that was a very cheating thing to do. The reason agnostic is called agnostic is because calling it output 001/2 was going to be kind of boring. But also that was the original stem for that one had a kind of choral feel to it. And I kind of took it and rendered that audio track into MIDI and then passed it back through some strings and some other choral patches and things like that. And so it was kind of choral music, but not really churchy choral music. And that's why it's agnostic, is because it's just it's kind of our impression of, you know, what you might hear at a cathedral, but without it being.
I suppose it's interesting because when you do name your tracks and say that track becomes big for whatever reason, you imbue in it the sense that that's meant to engender that sort of feeling to listeners going forward.
Yeah.
And we're not being special, but we're just saying this is what the sound is. The numbers 47 is not going to tell you anything about it. Right. What do you make of the track? Love it. I'm very happy you love it. But and what you make of it is absolutely fantastic. But it's not trying to say this is a love song.
Right.
About a boy, girl, loses girl, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just, this is what it is. Make of it what you want.
We haven't really had that scenario where we're both in the same room as I'm doing my stuff, you know. So I don't have you online going, "No, Mike, don't do that." You know. So I've essentially just done kind of what I thought was necessary, and then shared it with you in a kind of work in progress to say this is roughly where I'm going. One of the things that I love about the musical partnership here is that typically you don't come back and go, "Oh, no, that's dreadful, don't do that." You know, it's always been very supportive, and yes, you know, that's go in the right direction, well done.
That's a very interesting point, and the reason for that, and I could be, you know, honest with you, that's not what I've done to Fraser either. I have created something which both you and Fraser have decided is something you want to take further, and because you are both excellent musicians and producers, you have turned the things that I have done into something that is fantastic. It's not something I expected, but because of that, I love it. And it can be as either out there or as tuneful or as big or as small as possible. But really, it's not my place to say to either you or Fraser, "No, that's not what I want you to do with it." Take it in a different direction, because I have no directions in mind for the pieces that I release. Right. And I'm delighted with the way that you take them in your own preferred direction, and that I'm just made up with that. And I very rarely, if ever, come back to you and say, "Nah, that's not for me."
Yeah. One of the great things, you know, when you can find a musician that you want to work with who is, you know, the confidence in each other just to say, "Yeah, you know, do what you do. You know, don't bend to what I think you should do with it, but, you know, go with it, you know, trust your instincts."
If it sounds good, you like it, you print it, you move on.
Yeah.
Either be it for one particular, the whole track or a stem or whatever it might be, like it and move on. Do not nibble it to death until you think that's just the amount of EQ I need to have. That's just not the way I want to work, or I expect people I work with will want to work.
Yeah. It's just as well, really, because my approach is slapdash and half-arsed. You know, it's usually
seems to work.
Go with the first idea. And don't, you know, finessing is not something that I do.
These things are recorded not at a rate, but they increase. The count increases every week. So rather than going back and thinking, "Oh, have I done enough with that?" There's a whole world out there of new sounds to explore.
Right.
Let's do that. Always look forward, don't look back.
But that's kind of baked into your approach, because when you unplug everything, you can't
necessarily
go back to it and finesse it. Yeah.
I think I did 70 plus tracks on the first USB stick, I did 94 or something on the second USB stick. And then I started to think, do you know what? This is going somewhere. These are not just my noodlings. Yourself and Fraser rely on these things to make some stuff out of. So not that I could go back and revise or revisit the patches, but if you said, oh, I liked what you did with this track here, I can now look at my notes and see, okay, I could approximate it. And I mean approximate it. Because I can see which modules I used, which order they went in. But even so, chances are it'd be a different track anyway. But it's just for interest's sake to see what I did with, really. Whereas you see the trouble is, if you were Fraser said, what do you do with this track here on the first two sticks? I wouldn't have a clue. I might recognise the module, but the effects I used or the utilities, no way. There's no way I can find out what was it.
Another thing that I love about working with you on this music, and it's almost the yin and yang thing, because you're entirely hardware based and I'm entirely computer based. So
I know, it's incredible, isn't it?
I have no hardware sense. I've got MIDI controllers, but no hardware sense. It's all completely within the box, and so it seems nice that and kind of fitting that you provide all of that aspect, and I do the kind of other half of the puzzle, and then bring it together.
Yeah, agreed. I'm not precious about it. Before my first studio laptop did die, I had the Native Complete, I had Arturia, the synths, and the Korg Legacy Collection. Loved them all. Don't get me wrong. I thought this was the way forward. As my wife will say to her chagrin, I started the whole revisiting music back in 2009 with one synthesizer that I got down from the loft, and I bought a laptop and had lots of soft synths. Well, those days have gone. And whilst I'm not precious about it, I like the fact that, for example, with all the synths that I've got, I can switch them on. I can probably switch them on in 30 years' time, and the same thing will happen. You can't say that about a laptop. And I just got so fed up with my laptop crashing. I thought, you know what, I don't need this. I can take my keyboards to the gigs with the band or whatever, and I can produce what I'm doing day in, day out, and not worry about it. So I love soft synths, but I've just decided just to not worry about upgrading PCs or laptops. Spend the money on keyboards instead. It'd be fun to do a Tayus gig.
I have no idea what a Tayus gig would look like.
No, absolutely not.
It might take a good half hour to get going.
I mean, a lot of the modular sets, when people do it live, if they're not doing a hard techno set, if it's more an ambient, ethereal sense, they will, spend half an hour or longer getting somewhere, and the audience will sit there and just accept it and enjoy it, etc. But that's the beauty. If you're doing modular, you dictate where it goes. We try and say for number stations that we would do a separate band called Ghost Stations, where we would do modular stuff and the band would play along.
Right.
We tried it once or twice. Not that easy to get guitarists and drum machines to go online with what you're doing. But again, it's stuff that we'll have to try again in the future.
Another part of the album is that I kind of consciously didn't include drums. I mean, there's some clicks and there's one or two things in there, but I steered away from drum patterns. Number one, because when I get your stems, confession time, it's sometimes hard for me to figure out exactly what BPM it is or how many beats to the bar or anything like that. And sometimes it varies, I guess, through, patches and routing LFOs here and there, and have LFOs influencing other LFOs. And so if we were to do this live, then you're not having to lock in my laptop's notion of what the BPM is with what your modular rig is, because we'll just take that modular rig sound and then affect it and add to it in the way that we have done here.
I suppose realistically, if we were to play live, the chances are, and we've talked about this with Fraser and Dohnavùr too, is that the chances are that whatever stems you use for modular would have to be coming from Ableton in your case, or Logic in Fraser's case, because they're not repeatable. I probably can't even get something to be approximately what it sounded like. If you wanted that sound to be what the track was about, then the chances are we would do the synths live perhaps, or I could do some synths and you'd be doing some manipulation or some pads with Ableton. That might be a way forward, because I suspect that taking the modular rig on stage and trying to produce track 47 again is a
that's not going to work. Yeah. No. What I was thinking is that if we were to play live, then the original stem is still in the Ableton track, and then you would have to augment that with some synths or some additional
absolutely
bits, which would be interesting. We kind of turn the tables.
It would be interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It'd be good. Yeah, it'd be interesting. And you could try both. You could say that, once we can meet up and spend the day making some stuff, we could work out, right, let's just do some freefall. See what happens if I do my modular, it comes into Ableton, and what do to it. What does that sound like? Is that a big thumbs up? Or thumbs down?
Yeah.
Okay, that's one experiment. Next thing, let's do 19, the backing stem. You play that, and either I go along with it or make up something on the modular, or play some keyboards, and then you manipulate it, and again see if that works. Which way is better for us?
Yeah, it would be really odd if when we do stuff for albums we do it one way and then live we flip it completely.
Well, wouldn't that'd be fascinating? That'd be great, because I suspect not everyone does it that way. Everyone's all about trying to make the live experience reproduction of what you hear on the record. And by doing it this way, it's something very different.
Yeah. Be interesting for the audience as well.
Yeah.
Might have to get
play 19.
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
I'm glad you asked me that. Perhaps not.
Yeah, exactly. Here's 19.5. You can find the album Synergism by Tayus at Tayus, TAYUS.bandcamp.com. Thanks for listening.